Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel, and I hope everybody had a beautiful weekend after Christmas. My parents got here yesterday, drove down here. They left on Christmas Day for my sisters, got here yesterday. They will be in the Madeira Beach, Tampa Bay area until the end of March. I'm very excited about that. They are staying at a condo right on the beach about 3 miles north of from where I am. Very, very nice place. I think they're very excited about it. I'm excited for them. And a great view of the Gulf. And I only get to see them a couple times a year. And so this will be one of the longest times that I've been around them, probably since I moved from Pennsylvania back in 1998. So that's what went on with me this weekend. They said the traffic coming down from Pennsylvania, Ohio area was terrible. Everybody going back home for the holidays. A lot of construction, a lot of cars. And they both looked pretty worn out when they got here yesterday. So I hope they slept well. Let's get right to the show. I want to remind you that during the show, if you wish to tweet me, please do. At Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between, or if you're not on Twitter, feel free to email me during the show, and that would be edwarddentzel@reagan.com. I will tell you about everything else I do outside of this show a little later in the broadcast. I debated long and hard where I wanted to go with the first story today. I have a lot of different directions that I could go with the show today, where I could start. I'm going to start with religion. Given that I could have done this, I guess this topic Christmas Eve or sometime last week, but that would have been a little bit of a downer. I just want to talk about what it seems like Christianity's retreat in the United States. I think that's very appropriate, and I don't want to get into this. I'm not going to go in the direction of, consumerism. In fact, I'm going to go exactly the opposite direction of that. But this idea that Christmas and the birth of Christ has been covered up by Santa Claus and presents and fireworks and people putting lights on their house and all of this. I'm not going to go in that direction because I'm not so sure that those kinds of arguments weren't being made 50 years ago. I don't know. I'm sure that there were a bunch of people back then that were worried that the true story of Christ, the birth of Jesus, is getting covered up by Christmas 50 years ago, 60 years ago, however long ago. Now, I don't know what those people would want in return or in exchange. And really, I don't know. I don't think that the birth of Jesus, most people know why December 25th in the United States is a special day. And it's a special day in all sorts of other countries as well. Even countries that maybe are not as Christian as the United States is. But it does give me a chance in this Christmas season, this holiday season, a holiday that's built upon Christianity. This isn't Halloween. This isn't, of course, there is a story that goes along with Halloween that's somewhat Christian as well, but that's not how we think of it. Or Thanksgiving, or the 4th of July, or anything like that. Memorial Day, Labor Day, those are not Christian holidays. Of course, Easter is. But what is going on with Christianity in the United States this time? Why does it seem like it is on the retreat? Why is it that for so long the Ten Commandments were in many courtrooms across the United States, and then suddenly within the last few years it seems like they're being taken out under the guise of the separation of church and state? On down and down we go to the point where even moments of silence are criticized and banned. And You can do a search on Google for example, graduation ceremonies where people have gotten in trouble for mentioning God or having a prayer. Athletes getting together, high school athletes getting together. There's a story out there of a coach who was having a prayer get-together on the field after a game and was getting in trouble for that. There's several stories like that, on and on and on. What is going on with that? See, I would say, and I don't want to hear it, see, I'm not a believer that it's because of atheism's rise in the United States. The truth is, yes, atheism, belief that there's really is nothing after you die. Let's just keep it simple, saying when you die, that's just it. There is no heaven, there is no hell, there is no purgatory. For Muslims, there are no 72 virgins, nothing. You dying is like flipping a light off in a room. Everything just goes dark and that's it. Although there has been a rise in atheism in the United States, it does not correlate, the statistics do not correlate with the amount of people who consider themselves Christian who don't go to church anymore. Meaning there may be, let's say, 3 million more atheists in the United States than there were 20 years ago. But the amount of people, at least, and there are studies out there, the census does these kinds of studies, other independent, non-governmental groups do these studies. There's a lot more than 3 million people over the last 20 years who have stopped going to Christian churches, whether it's Mass, whatever they call it, and whatever denomination of Christianity. I'm a Catholic, or I was raised Catholic, and we call it Mass. See, what I think has happened with Christianity and why it seems to be on the retreat is because it forgot how to defend itself. When for decades, if not centuries, it's just taken for granted. And you know what? There are a lot of core connections between what has gone on with Christianity in the United States and what has gone on with conservatism in the United States. And not because it just happens to be that a lot of Christians are conservative. I've made the point. You know what? There are a lot of Christian liberals out there too. It would seem like a contradiction, but it's not necessarily so, because as I've told you, Christianity, at least for Catholics and some of the other denominations, outside of abortion and maybe a couple other political issues, most denominations of Christianity are not very conservative. They're just not. In fact, as just recently, within the last few months, I was reading something pointing out that some of these Christian scholars that we know after the time of Christ, before the year 2015, maybe going back to the Middle Ages, maybe Thomas Aquinas, some others, they weren't what we would call conservative. Their writings much more went along the lines toward liberalism and socialism than free markets, free enterprise, capitalism, laissez-faire, private property, stuff like that. And that should be noted. This relationship between Christianity and what we would call limited government is a somewhat new thing. We have to remember that. So, and that's why I guess a lot of times these days, a lot of liberals will get away with saying, well, Jesus was a socialist. I maybe not. I don't know. I don't think so. But that's how liberals can get away with it. And you can find many articles out there with that kind of reasoning. The problem that Christianity has had, getting back to it, is that it has forgotten how to defend itself. It had no enemies for so long in the United States. And when you do that, this is like the Ben Carson example. Ben Carson comes across to me as a guy, as a conservative, who is somewhat conservative, but I don't know if he's ever had an argument with a liberal in his entire life. And that's why he makes so many mistakes, maybe, when he's talked about conservatism and specifically in these debates. Maybe it's on purpose, maybe it's by accident. He just uses a lot of examples that if he had argued with a liberal once, he would have lost. Because his reasoning is so illogical. Christianity, I think, in the United States has been like that. That as soon as one person came up with the idea, hey, you Christians out there, well, why is it that your 10 Commandments are in all of these courthouses across the United States when we're supposed to have a separation of church and state? And the best I think Christianity can do is, well, that's the way it's always been. Well, that's not how things work in the United States, and pretty much nowhere where there's some sort of representative republic or democracy. That generally things have to be explained. And if you as a Christian can't explain that, you're going to be in trouble. And that's why over the years, Christianity continues to lose ground in these forums, to the point now where it seems that religious people in the United States can't even defend a moment of silence. Can't even defend a football coach that gets all of his players together, players who want to take part, and pray after the game, just to say, thank you, Lord, for not allowing anybody to get hurt, that we're all now all friends again. Yes, we were opponents on the field, but we're all friends again, and something like that. Whatever the kind of thing they do in these prayer circles. Christians can't even defend that. And that's a problem. And we as conservatives, I think that we've kind of gone along with that as well. We've gotten into this situation where, in our case, we've been using the same arguments, same defenses for so many years regarding our attitude toward limited government, low taxes, low regulation, pro-life, strong military, that we just don't realize that our arguments maybe don't work as well as they do anymore. It's kind of the same situation to me. It feels the same. On top of that, the concern is Christianity, is that, yes, it may not be based in classical liberalism, which we now call conservatism, Christianity as we understand it. But it seems like over the past 20 years that left wing of Christianity has felt very comfortable in coming out of the closet. You know, I want you to know, I'm a Christian, and I have no problem saying this. I'm not going to get all wound up in saying that there is a part of Christianity that could be liberal. My faith in God is outside of that. And I don't even consider myself to be a very good Christian. But I think that you start turning people off, and I think this goes both ways. That if you are a Christian leader and you start talking about politics, you're going to start turning a lot of people off. And I think this, to me, as far as I can understand, this kind of started in the 60s, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise. You get to the point in the 21st century where the Pope feels comfortable talking about the intoxication of consumerism. Now, I'll tell you that I'm no fan of consumerism either, meaning the collection of things just to collect things. I'm not sure that's what he means, though. The obsession with things, to me, is a problem. But I think that the Pope means something else. I think that he means just people and their private property that they already have. And the wanting to make more money so you can have a better life. down deep, that's what I suspect the Pope means. And it's no wonder then that a lot of Catholics start tuning the guy out. As I heard Dennis Miller say a while ago when his radio was still on the air, that once you, as a Christian leader or religious leader, you start getting out of the realm of saving people's souls and getting people to remember why God loves them, you start getting out of that faith and works type of stuff, you're treading on dangerous ground. I think you're treading on shaky ground that could cause you to lose people. I'm not saying that you should always just say what people want to hear, but you have to remember, why are you there? Why are you there? You're not there to tell people that they buy too much stuff. That's for somebody else. That's maybe for an economist to do. That may be for a pundit like me to do. Just my personal philosophy of the world. Maybe outside, and that has nothing necessarily to do with my Christianity. But I think with the obsession of things and owning stuff just because, it just find it kind of strange to me. I can understand wanting to live comfortably where you don't have to live on the street. I get that. But cars after cars, boats after boats. I know that it keeps other regular people working and everything, but when that's all you think about, maybe you've lost contact with what's really important in life. Maybe. Once again, though, people are free to do with their money what they want as long as it's their money and they've earned it. But you tread into that area as a Christian leader, as a religious leader, and I think these people forget, you know what? Most people, they just want to go. They want to be around people who think like they do. They want to talk to other people about their faith in God. They want to pray together. It's just that kind of camaraderie that people can have in those types of situations. Instead of always just staying at home and just praying and doing whatever you can do within the privacy of your own home. That is where I think Christianity has gone wrong. It's the lack of having the knowledge to defend itself, the experience to defend itself, the treading into waters that I think that are outside political or religious discourse. And there's one more thing on top of it, and you know that I've kind of gone in this direction a little bit. In fact, my next book, if you don't know, called The Comebacks, covers this a little bit. It covers faith and what do you mean by faith and how faith can be shaken and what it means to be religious and to have belief in something. And the funny thing is, I don't even call it a religious book. But it's an intersection of a miracle and how humans react to that miracle in my book, The Comebacks. But the third part of it, which I mention in my fiction book, The Comebacks, is this increasing acceptance of religious leaders who I would say, although they may be Christian, when they talk, they don't sound like it. The first person I think of is Joel Osteen. He may be the nicest guy in the world. I don't know. Never met him. Probably never will meet him. I don't know what goes on inside his head, his heart. I don't know. I know there's a lot of people who have bad stories about them. I have no reason to believe those stories any more than all the good stories about the Osteens. But he has a huge church. He's very popular, has a TV show, has made all this money and all these... The church that he has is an ex-sports auditorium. Is that right? I think it would hold tens of thousands of people. Whereas 15 years ago, I think about when he came on the scene, I had friends that I worked with that are a fan of his, and I just told him, he doesn't sound like a Christian to me. He sounds more like a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a life coach or somebody like that. It's like he mentions a couple biblical phrases, and then he'll go off for an hour, and you won't even realize that this is a gathering for Christians. That's been another problem. People kind of diluting the religion. And I'll say it, even though I wasn't even born when this happened. The worst thing I think the Catholic Church ever did was going from a Latin Mass to an English Mass. I know that was part of trying to modernize it, or what do they call that? Vatican II, Vatican 15, or whatever they called it. One of the worst things they ever did. And I think also that by watering Christianity down and making it a little bit less fire and brimstone hasn't helped. The truth is that, there's a reason, for example, that going outside of religion, there's a reason that people like hard-ass coaches. There's a reason that Bobby Knight has been loved for all these years, despite some of his antics. There's a reason that Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, he's kind of that way, not as much as Bobby Knight is, but he's kind of that same way. Hard. We can go through any sport in the United States, and you find most of the most popular coaches kind of fire and brimstone. Very energetic, bring a lot of passion to what they do, aren't afraid to get on the referees and the umpires, on and on and on. There's something within the human instinct, human nature that likes that. And the Tom Landrys, who is exact opposite, although there are a lot of those types too, they're in the minority when it comes to the kinds of coaches and leaders that have been successful. I think religion has forgotten this. In an effort to bring more people in, trying to be this kinder, gentler kind of Christianity, I think that it has turned a lot of people off. But you have to do that, though. You can't do that and be political at the same time. Can't do it. Nobody wants to hear it. That's like a Republican going to a Democrat meeting, or a Democrat going to a Republican meeting. Nobody wants to hear it. But if you can keep the topic to the Bible and the love of God, faith in God, works on earth while you are here, praying for others and things like that, then fire and brimstone isn't so bad. That can be somewhat motivating. That can be somewhat inspiring. But that is not the current state. All these things I'm explaining are not the current state of Christianity in the year 2015. And I have to say that Joel Osteen is the opposite of fire and brimstone. So no matter what the Pope might say, no matter what other religious leaders might say, well, the spirit of Christianity is getting covered up by consumerism in this holiday season, Christianity has done most of the damage to itself. I think being a little lazy, a little bit too accepting, trying to change with the times, which is a mistake. Trying to tone its image down, afraid to offend people. It has been one huge, big mistake. I know, I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but, I was raised in a Catholic home. I was an altar boy. I was a church organist. So I have a lot of church hours in the bank. But my parents, they don't go to Catholic Mass anymore. I don't know how long it's been since they went, but they go to church, but I don't even know what the denomination of Christianity they go to. And they make it sound like it's a little bit, not total Southern Baptist fire and brimstone. It's just a little tougher. It doesn't feel like, I think when they go to this service, that the guy who leads everybody is going through the motions, which I may say, back in the late 80s, early 90s of Catholic Church that I went to, kind of felt like everybody was just going through the motions. Everybody just showing up to cure their conscience so they can say, hey, I went to Mass today. And that's really not what religious services of any denomination are really supposed to be about. You're supposed to get something out of it. You're not just supposed to check it off on your list of things to do. It's not like going to the grocery store. Hey, I got the milk. And when you water it down and you get away from the fire and brimstone and you keep the topics bland because you're afraid of offending anyone, that's what you get. You get people that walk away uninspired. Then it shouldn't be over time that people just lose interest in their Christianity, or they just say, well, you know what? If this is what we're going to get, we might as well just stay at home. So I was going to talk about that last week, but it just felt like a little bit of a downer. Given the Christmas season. But this is really what I believe. I mean, we could get into all sorts. This isn't a Christian show, but I think that it's not a Christian network. Red State Talk Radio is not a Christian network necessarily. And we know there are a lot of conservative atheists out there. They exist. But I think that we as conservatives, we can learn a lot from this. We can extract quite a bit of information from this, and how we've kind of told ourselves, too many of our politicians, that they need to tone their acts down, they need to be more accepting. We know where we need to be. Do we have the courage to be there? Likewise with Christianity. It knows where it needs to be. If it wants to be honest with itself, if I can look at where it started to lose its influence, then it should be able to look and see where it started to lose its influence and say, well, what did we start doing wrong back then? Well, it was this and it was that. I don't know if they're willing to do that. It seems to me that they just want to turn even more into the curve. They want to continue to slide even more. And that's something that we as conservatives, we cannot continue to do. This is why I continue to say that we need to find new arguments. We don't have to change what we think. We just have to find better ways to explain ourselves. That's what I devote the show to. I come to this show for a few different reasons. To try to find different arguments, new ways to explain conservatism to people. And as a teacher, I always try to keep in mind, I'm not a teacher, but I look at myself as a teacher on this show. I keep in mind that there are new people to politics, not to just necessarily conservatism, but politics in total, who may be turning on my show that day. And I want to be able to speak to that person. And I want to be able to give that person information. I don't want to keep going over the same territory over and over and over that I think too many conservative media people do these days, and been doing it and made lots of money over it over that time. But we as the common conservatives out here, we have nothing to show for it, just like the average Christian has nothing to show for himself or herself after years of following Christian leaders down that path. Your average Christian now runs into problems no matter where he or she goes, whether it's at school, whether it's at work, in regards to what they can say and what they can't say. All of this receding, giving away of territory. Whereas we know that the founding fathers were Christian men, not perfect men, but definitely believers, and they crafted our Constitution in that vein. Even though maybe some of them didn't believe in miracles, like Thomas Jefferson, they were definitely a believer in a higher power. and that men were not angels. Unlike what socialists and atheists will try to tell you, or can be angels. Seems to be what socialists and atheists try to sell us, that man can be perfected. Our country was built upon the idea that man is imperfect, and that is a Christian idea. Got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
Talk radio the way the founding fathers would have done it.
I'm just a man trying to make his mark on history.
Red State Talk Radio.
Accuracy and range are a necessity. Now comfort is an option as well. Nemo Arms introduces the Omen 300 Win Mag. The Omen 300 is perfectly balanced for reduced recoil, creating sub-minute of angle accuracy. And fit for the tightest of tolerances. The Omen is offered in carbine or full-length models with a 10 or 14-round magazine. American-made, owned, and designed. Nemo Arms is setting a new standard in modern sporting rifles. Find out more at nemoarms.com.
Less than 2% of America's population volunteers to defend our nation. Though we rarely see them, we live the benefits of these heroes' sacrifices in the freedom we know and the safety we feel. Each and every day, the Gary Sinise Foundation serves our nation by honoring our defenders, veterans, first responders, and their families. We do this by creating and supporting unique programs designed to entertain, educate, inspire, strengthen, and build communities. The Gary Sinise Foundation has grown because the need has never been greater. Together, we'll improve the lives of thousands of American heroes and their families day in, day out, all year long. While we can never do enough to show our gratitude to our nation's defenders, our veterans, our first responders, and the families who stand by them, we can always do a little more. Join us. Visit GarySiniseFoundation.org.
Hi, I'm Gil Fulbright. The people that run my campaign, they've made this commercial, and I'm in it. This campaign, it's not about me. It's about crafting a version of me that'll appeal to you. A version that visits random work sites with paid actors pointing at things. A version of me that doesn't find old people loathsome or pointless. Has a conventionally attractive yet curiously still family. Listening to my constituents, legislating, these are things I don't do. What I do is spend about 70% of my time raising funds for re-election. I'd do anything to stay in office. My name's Gil Fulbright, but hell, I'll change my name to Phil Goldbright, or Bill Fulbright, or fill up my mouth with farts. These are the things that are important to me. And these are the fine people that finance my campaign. Now, in order to do these things, I have to stay in office. And to stay in office, I have to keep these guys happy. Now, if any of these things make these guys unhappy, well, my hands are tied. So come November, the choice is clear. You want another spineless mouthpiece for special interest and lobbyists? Or a spineless mouthpiece for special interest and lobbyists? I'm Philip a Mouth with Farts, and I approve this message.
Back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I remind you once again, you can tweet me during the show, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. You can also email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com. Okay, let's get into a little bit more politics. Let's get away from the religion, get into what is going on, what could go on into 2016. I saw this article, and it's several different places, but I'm going to cite the one from Bloomberg.com. Jim Webb is thinking about making a third-party run. He has been very critical of Hillary Clinton lately for very good reasons, her lack of foreign policy accomplishments, moreover, the mistakes, the huge mistakes that she made while Secretary of State. And foreign policy is kind of Jim Webb's strong suit. It's not, the funny thing is when he was actually taking part in the debates, I think I said at one point, John Kasich should go do the Democrat debate, and Jim Webb should go do the Republican debate. Jim Webb, very much of an old type of Democrat. I think that Jim Webb probably could have done great things in the Democrat Party, although I know he already has. He's a very accomplished guy. He was born about 40 years too late. His brand of 50 years maybe too late. His brand of Democrat was last hugely popular probably in the 1960s, going through the 1980s. Maybe a good example of that might be like Sam Nunn, somebody like that. And I'm sure that I'm going to be the only person in the United States doing a show today that mentions Sam Nunn. Just like last week, I mentioned Daniel Ortega. By the way, did you know that Daniel Ortega is once again the leader of Nicaragua? I did not know that. I looked him up for some reason after I made that mention of him last week. Looked him up, and he's the leader of that country again. And liberals still love him. In any case, I just want to temper your hopes about him running as a third party and screwing over Hillary Clinton. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that the Clinton machine will do everything in its power to make it worth his while not to run. Whether that means guaranteeing him some post in a Hillary Clinton cabinet, maybe Secretary of Defense, maybe he would be the Secretary of State, something like that, or they would get into his background. I mean, you know the Clintons, before they're done, we'll know every girl that Jim Webb dated when he was in 9th grade. That is just the way it is. So I don't want all of you to hope that he somehow does a Ross Perot, Ralph Nader, Ron Paul type of maneuver, and in this way screws over Hillary Clinton. You know, the truth is we don't even know who the Republican is at this point. It could be a Jim Webb candidacy could hurt a Republican as well, depending on who that Republican is. Have to keep that in mind. There's another part of this, if we want to go in that direction, though. Could you imagine a situation where there were 4 people seriously running for president? Think of it this way. Hillary Clinton gets the nomination on the Democrat side, and Jim Webb somehow gets through the Clinton maze and puts together a somewhat serious third-party campaign. Then you have the Republican, and let's say that it's Marco Rubio. I know that he's not necessarily out front right now, but we just don't know. It's too easy at this point to say Ted Cruz, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Let's say Marco Rubio would happen to get the Republican nomination, and then Donald Trump, and because I don't believe him for a second, Donald Trump decides he's going to go. So it wouldn't just be third party, it would be fourth party. So you'd have a Hillary Clinton versus Jim Webb versus Marco Rubio versus Donald Trump for president of the United States. Donald Trump doesn't get the Republican nomination. He's ticked. All his supporters say that he should go fourth party, and he does. You talk about a political scientist's dream scenario. Every political scientist will have papers. They will not be lacking for material for years. This would be like what Watergate did for journalism in the United States. All these people that suddenly wanted to go into journalism because of that. That kind of presidential election in 2016 would get all sorts of people jumping into the political science arena. Granted, it would be fascinating to watch. And dare I say it, I don't know who would win if something like that happened. And I know that if the guys at 538, the blog 538.com, wanted to do a chance of that happening, the percentages would have to be under 1% of something like that happening. Granted, maybe the odds aren't as huge as winning Powerball, which is up to $300 million, by the way, now. But you could see that happening. And it would be very interesting. Because like I said, I think that Donald Trump absolutely 100% is still open to a run outside of the Republican Party if he does not get the nomination. And we know that Jim Webb has already said as much. The problem with Jim Webb also is not that he's out of step with the Democrat Party. How many people, just regular Democrats, are like him now? Probably a few. Blue-collar types, not necessarily crazy anti-business, pro-Greenpeace. There are Democrats still out there like that, but I just don't know if there are enough of them to make a difference at all. I know they exist. I don't know that they could ever be convinced enough to go third party. I don't think that, let's put it this way in comparison. There isn't going to be that kind of dedication to Jim Webb on the Democrat side that I think that Donald Trump could get on a third-party run on the Republican side. I think that's very safe to say. And given that we know what Donald Trump's numbers are and that we know that what Jim Webb's numbers are, and granted they're hurt by the fact that he suspended his campaign however long ago. But there's no way that Jim Webb, if he gets back in the race tomorrow as a Democrat and just doing gangbusters, that his numbers would ever approach Donald Trump's. Never. So, I think that Jim Webb's a good guy. I think that he is serious about his opposition to Hillary Clinton, specifically on her foreign policy positions. But I just want to tamp that all down. If you think that that's going to be a sneaky way for a Republican to get into the White House, I think you're wrong. No matter who you personally support, whether it is Donald Trump or Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, whoever, I think in the end, one of those guys is going to have to just beat Hillary Clinton straight up. It's going to be mono, womano, and there may be a small third-party run. Maybe, like I said, Donald Trump gets the nomination. That's going to be big trouble. But I think in the end, it's just going to be mono, a womano, between a guy on the Republican side and Hillary Clinton. And there will be at least no third-party run on the Democrat side. But once again, I cannot rule out anything that Donald Trump might do. So if you read that story about Jim Webb this weekend and got all excited, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to dash your hopes. Let's move on to something else. This was interesting. Speaking of Donald Trump, and I know I'm going to continue to criticize him. I'm going to continue to criticize the people who support him. And this is something that I think that people don't get. I was listening to one of the Ricochet podcasts last week, one of the free ones. I understand they now have some podcasts where you have to be a member to listen to, but most of them still are free. It was either the main Ricochet podcast or it was the podcast with Mona Sharon, and Rob Long was with her on that. It was one of those. But it was one of the ones where Rob Long, former executive producer for Cheers back in the early 90s, the TV show Cheers, who I met him, just a name drop, on the National Review cruise 3 years ago. Good guy. But he was talking about Donald Trump, and he said he wishes that there's this, of course, all these stories out there about how Donald Trump, some of his businesses have been failures. I've pointed that out. Other people have pointed that out. And Rob Long says, it's a shame that Donald Trump does it. He should be talking about those failures. And Rob Long is not necessarily a big Donald Trump fan. He's not. But he thinks that Donald Trump should point that out just to show that, rich people fail too. And it's not all unicorns and rainbows when you are a businessman or businesswoman, that you take risks. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But you can learn things from failure. And that is true. That's why, for example, out of the political world, as a guy, the more women you ask out on a date, the better you're going to get at it. There's going to be tons of failures. You're going to get a yes once in a while, and then you'll go back to getting a long string of no's. But over time, you will get better at it, unless you're just obnoxious. And that's the way it is in the business world as well. We know if you, and I've read about these people just because I take an interest in this stuff. You know that Thomas Edison, Walt Disney, Colonel Sanders, Harry Truman had, so many failures in his life before he got to be vice president, then president of the United States. These stories are well known. So why is it then that Rob Long, he just wonders, Donald Trump could inspire people talking about this, but does Rob Long, and I think maybe there are a lot of other people who are thinking the same thing that support Donald Trump, why doesn't he talk about this? He can't talk about it because he portrays himself as the guy who never fails. He portrays himself as Mr. Perfect. He portrays himself as the guy who can fix anything. And talking about, he'll just outright deny that he was ever bankrupt and that any of his business, and he'll blame it on other people. He'll never say, well, you know what, I tried that, thought that was a good idea, and it just didn't work out. You can see that in the documentary about the USFL when he was finally interviewed about it. Not willing to take any responsibility for what happened. Even though he was the main cause of the USFL's failure. Now, maybe it was going to fail anyway, but he certainly made it happen faster than anybody thought it could happen, given that their product was football, American football. And this is a problem. See, all those other people that I mentioned, Thomas Edison, Walt Disney, they weren't afraid. They knew that their failures were all out there. I don't think that they. What's the story that Thomas Edison tried 200 different types of light bulbs before he found one that worked, that was reliable enough. Of course, the technology of the engineering of it, in the elements and substances that needed to be used. Donald Trump, if he were Thomas Edison, would just tell you that he got it right the first time. And see, this is what makes why I say that he and Barack Obama have a lot in common. That neither of them is willing to own up to any failure. And that is dangerous. That is dangerous. That leads to people covering things up. Now, covering up a business failure within a large corporation is one thing. But when I think about the covering up of a failure in government, you know what I think of? I think of Benghazi. I think of Hillary Clinton. I think of Barack Obama. And dare I say it, if Donald Trump was ever president, if something like that happened, he would take no responsibility for it. He would go probably react to it like they have. It's no big deal. Not necessarily never happened, because we know 4 people dead. There are 4 families out there who lost loved ones, so it can't be necessarily covered up. But it's just no big deal. Other people made mistakes. It couldn't have been avoided. And then Donald Trump has the gall to criticize Trey Gowdy and the hearings he had on Benghazi. Now, I criticized the hearings on Benghazi, with the most recent ones with Hillary Clinton, for totally different reasons. And granted, I don't come from a standpoint of me covering up my failures. I have lots of failures in my life, both public and personal. Way it goes, I guess. As I've told you, serial killers get away with their murders. Little kids get cancer. The world is in perfect place. But I think that Donald Trump has the type of ego that would go to extraordinary lengths to not admit his failures and blame them on other people. So getting back to what Rob Long says, does he not understand that the reason Donald Trump can't do this is because he sees himself in a certain way and he wants other people to see himself in a certain way. So he has to stick to a particular story no matter what happens, and that can be very limiting. Because if you know that you are the type of person who never is going to want to admit failure to anybody, that kind of restricts what you're going to do. It restricts taking of chances. It restricts the taking of risks when not all of the information is known, but something has to be done. So it's the worst of both worlds. Either the person won't do anything at all when there's every reason to do something, or they'll do something, and if it goes wrong, they'll try to cover it up and say that it never happened. So for them, it's like heads they win, tails we lose. There's an accompanying story to this. It's a little also about Donald Trump. That this comes from Politico. That Bernie Sanders, of all people, is trying to get support from Donald Trump people. He's trying to pick off Donald Trump supporters. Now, why would he be doing that? Why isn't Bernie Sanders trying to pick off Ted Cruz supporters? Or Marco Rubio supporters? Or Chris Christie supporters? Maybe it could be that Bernie Sanders knows Donald Trump better than most, it seems, Republicans know Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders looks at Donald Trump and his supporters and say, you know what? It seems we may have a lot in common, which is something that I've been saying for months. The reason that Bernie Sanders isn't looking at Marco Rubio supporters or Ted Cruz supporters is because they're too dang conservative to ever support Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side. But Bernie Sanders looks at Trump supporters and said, doesn't seem to me that they're conservative at all. It seems that I could give them a message that they would really, really be open to. And Donald Trump is the guy who is leading on the Republican side. I guess that's one more reason that it bothers me so much. And it's one more reason I've told you that Donald Trump is not conservative. He's the most establishment candidate there is, just like Bernie Sanders is an establishment candidate, despite him saying otherwise. With his love of big government. So Bernie Sanders and his people going after Trump supporters, I guess it takes one to know one. Before I go, I want to remind you can find my books at Amazon.com, my Govicide series and my book Distant. You can download them to your Kindle in a matter of moments. As I mentioned earlier in the show, you can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. You can go to edwarddentzel.com where you can find all of my old Red State Talk radio shows. You can also find a link, edwarddentzel.com/book, to get the free first chapter of my next book, The Comebacks. You can go to Podbean, YouTube, and SoundCloud to also find all of my old Red State Talk radio shows, at least my recent ones. I just started doing that recently. That might be more convenient for you if you miss the live show. on the day that it's broadcast. You can also find my shows in the podcast section of the iTunes Store. Then finally, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight, and I will talk to you again very soon. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.